Chapter 9, Autumn 1863. Over the previous weeks, there had been a change in the sunlight. It grew mellow and golden, and kinder than the summer's sun. Abraham and Ladysmith had gathered windfall apples, yellow, green, and red. This year, the red seemed redder, but perhaps it was just a trick of the light. It was the time of year when everything dropped onto the earth, from apples to chestnuts. Abraham and Ladysmith were in his garden. He had taken down an apple tree that was old and no longer bearing. He rubbed his hands over the wood with pleasure. It was good and would be fragrant and long burning. Charity waited patiently as he loaded the logs into the back of the wagon. Even though she couldn't say, she seemed happy to be home again. Ladysmith was sitting up on the seat of the wagon. She wore a rose-colored shawl, and her cheeks were the same bright pink. "Sure, wish we knew what had happened to Lamar," she said. Abraham finished loading the wood into the wagon. "I hope he's back home by now," he said. That evening, Ladysmith and her mother were having dinner with Mr. and Mrs. David Wills. Over dessert of apple pie, Mr. Wills told them about his idea. "I'd like to make our cemetery a national one," he said. "After all, this battle was perhaps the most crucial of the war." His dark eyes were eager. He told them he'd bought 17 acres next to the cemetery and had hired a landscape architect to design the new burial ground. "If my plan works, we'll have a dedication ceremony." The ladies had been listening attentively. Ladysmith finally asked, "Well, what's the difference between a regular cemetery and a national one?" "That's a good question, young lady," replied Mr. Wills. He explained that a national cemetery would be maintained by the federal government for the men who served honorably for their country. On a bleak November afternoon, a packet arrived for Abraham, sent in Mrs. Lightly's care. It was about the size of a small envelope and wrapped in burlap. Sacking tied with twine. The little package was so frail, it seemed a miracle that it had been made from the south to the north at all. And how it had come was a miracle in itself. It had left Rabun Gap by way of Lamar's cousin, who was home on unofficial leave. He was homesick. When he returned to his company, he passed the package along to another soldier, who in turn sent it to a brother who was serving in the Union Army. The little packet continued on through the Union lines, soldier by soldier, until it reached Pennsylvania. Mrs. Lightly looked at the faded ink of the return address and knew that the sender had tendered it with extreme faith. Ladysmith offered to take it to Abraham. "Come right back now," her mother said. "Dinner's nearly ready. And wear your shawl. It's damp out." While Ladysmith watched, Abraham sat in his rocking chair and with careful hands unwrapped the first mail he had ever received. Inside the rough sacking was a smaller packet and a letter. Opening the letter, he read, "Dear Mr. Small, it is with sad heart that I tell you my brother Lamar has passed from this earth. The letter telling me said he was brave and did not complain one time. He wrote me to send you some okra seeds, which I have done. I thank you kindly for taking him to the doctors. You done the best you could. Lamar passed from his wounds in battle and a weakness in his chest. I know he is with the angels now. In sorrow I will ever remain. Pearl Cooper." After confronting Ladysmith and sending her back to her mother, Abraham opened the small brown twist of okra seeds. He poured them out and held them cupped in the palm of his hand. The dull green seeds were round as shot and felt faintly dusty, as though still warmed by the southern sun. He put them back into the packet. He'd plant them in spring when things looked more hopeful. Enoch got up from in front of the fire and came over to him, his dark tail like a plume of smoke. Abraham rubbed the cat's velvety head. Then he spoke words like a small prayer. "Fare thee well, Lamar," he said gently. "Fare thee very well indeed." Firelight cast flickering shadows against the walls of David Will's study. An oil lamp spilled gold across the surface of his desk. Ladysmith, he said softly, looking up from the paper he was writing. You awake? Ladysmith, who was keeping Mr. Wills company with her mother and Mrs. Wills, sewed in the back parlor, gazed at him from the deep hollow of the big chair next to the hearth. In her lap was a black cat whose purring could be heard over the crackle of the fire. Sir, she said, something coming back from her daydream. I have something to show you, he said. Putting the cat down, she went over to his chair. On the desk in front of her was an invitation, the ink not yet dry. It's for President Lincoln, said Mr. Wills, asking him to say a few words at the dedication. Ladysmith looked at the invitation written in Mr. Wills' slanting handwriting in thick black ink. It was dated November the 2nd, 1863, and was addressed to His Excellency A. Lincoln, President of the United States. Can I tell Abraham? She asked. You may, said Mr. Wills, smiling at her. Ladysmith knew how happy Abraham would be. After all, he'd wanted Mr. Lincoln to be invited from the beginning. They had talked about it earlier when they learned that Mr. Edward Everett, the former governor of Massachusetts and Secretary of State, had been invited as the main speaker at the ceremony. Abraham had shaken his head. Should have asked Mr. Lincoln to speak, he said. The president did receive an invitation, but only 2 weeks before the dedication, nearly 6 weeks after Mr. Everett had been invited. Someone later said that inviting the president had been an afterthought. The day before the president was due to arrive, Abraham showed up at the Wills' back door. I brought some wood for Mr. Lincoln, he said. It's all I have to give him, but it's good wood and will burn proper. Then he stacked half a cord of his prized apple wood in the woodpile and went on his way.